Danny, this was my favorite episode that we've done. I know you're not supposed to have favorites in these things, but spent an hour with Alex Heath from The Verge. We've been reading his stuff for years. He was constantly reporting about things when we were at Snapchat that we still to this day cannot figure out how in the world he knew. But he's got more access and more insight to people than anyone in tech. He's interviewed Zuck. He interviewed Altman. He actually interviewed Zuck right before coming on our podcast. So we were like an hour removed from Zuck breaking that they are going all in on AI. It's just a really cool conversation. Alex is just an awesome guy in general. And I thought it was like super enlightening, just like how honest he was about dealing with all these different types of personalities.
Yeah, it was really cool hearing him talk about his journey. I mean, this is somebody who loves technology. And as he stated during the interview, he is an eternal optimist when it comes to technology. And so to have him break this news from Zuckerberg, Sam Altman, Congress has used some of his reporting, which is very cool. To hear him talk about the future as he sees it, after talking to these leaders for 10, 15 years now, he brings a really unique insight, which I thought came through during the conversation.
Totally, man. So let's get into it. Here's our interview with Alex Heath from The Verge.
Welcome back to another episode of Taking Inventory. Today, we're joined by Alex Heath, who's the deputy editor at The Verge. He's also the writer of Command Line, the weekly newsletter about the tech industry's inside conversations and interviews. And he's interviewed people like Mark Zuckerberg, Sam Altman, and his reporting's been used by Congress, which is incredible. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to do this. It's been a minute since talking to you guys.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. I feel like we got like Walter Cronkite of like tech news here. So I know you got a ton going on, and there's a bunch of stuff we want to dive into, kind of about the sort of the industry in general. But before that, just like love to hear about like how you got into this. I mean, I've been following you for years, and like I feel like you've been doing it forever. But like, how'd you end up getting in this pretty amazing spot?
Oh, thanks. I guess we'll talk about this at some point, but I imagine it was the Snap coverage where you guys first started hearing about me back in the day.
Thanks. That was pretty new. We never found out who your mole was that way, but it was shocking how we were like, Alex, like stuff. It was like instant.
I was at CS recently, and there was a OG Snap person who we all know, I won't say on the air, who was trying to guess who my sources were even still back from the day. So yeah, I like to protect sources. How did I get into this? I have a kind of unorthodox path into this. I didn't go to like a fancy journalism school in Ivy League. I actually fell into this just being a nerd myself, and in high school, started blogging about jailbreaking iPhones and getting paid $15 a post. At the time, I think the site was iPhoneDownloadBlog.com, which was doing millions of uniques. And it was kind of at the height of like interest in, the iPhone was early and people were figuring out how can we change how it works, expand it, do creative things. And there was this budding community around that and with jailbreaking. And so I kind of fell into that as like just a nerdy kid, like getting my, having my identity kind of shaped by the people I was meeting online, and on forums and building Hackintoshes and stuff like that. So I've been covering this stuff since then, and I kept doing that, through college, and eventually worked my way into a full-time job, moved from the Midwest to New York, worked at BI back in the day, selling to Axel Springer, when it was Business Insider the first time. Made sense, rebranded back to that, and did a media startup, Cheddar, and then went to the Information for a couple of years, and I've been at The Verge, and yeah, it's been the only thing I've ever done as a job, and something that I find to still be incredibly enthralling, and I'm just a nerd about it. So I think that kind of has fueled kind of my journey.
Is it one of those things for you where like you would kind of do it for free? Like if like tomorrow The Verge disappeared, but you're still doing
it?
Yeah.
Well, not anymore, but yes, definitely back in the day, it was just something I was reading these sites, and even like the, the hubris of a whatever 15-year-old, I was reading this and going, I could write this better. Like they don't actually know what they're talking about. You can tell they're like getting it off of like Google or whatever. And so I reached out to the editor of one of these sites and was like, can I do this? Like, and I kept my age a secret for as long as possible. Remember going to like early Macworlds, underage, at events with open bars and feeling really nervous. And have always, I don't know, just like tried to fake it till I make it, I guess. And then eventually you make it and you're like, wow, I can't believe I got to fake my way into this. But yeah, that's kind of how it happened.
And was it always inevitable for you? I mean, did you ever even have a moment where you're like, I want to go maybe the more traditional like journalism path and like on air news, or like work at the New York Times and report, global stories? And you are reporting global stories, just tech.
Yeah, I've had many opportunities to go to like traditional outlets. You could call them newspapers. And I don't know. This is probably a bigger thing we can get into about media and kind of the state of media, but brands by themselves have never really been the thing for me. It's always about the people there and who I can learn from and who I can, I think of each outlet I go to as like expanding my networking pool. And, so the brand itself has never really allured me. So, I've always been more interested in like, how can I do the work that I want to do with the most creative freedom and people that I love working with and the most kind of toys in the toolkit, so to speak. So like, I've been able to dabble in pretty much every format of media. So like the kind of stint I did at Cheddar, kind of building up the reporting team there before it sold to Altice, was like, I want to try broadcast. We were doing broadcast digitally, right? But it was still kind of traditional broadcast television. So, and now I've done a lot of audio, done video, writing, obviously. So yeah, it's just been like, how can I learn and play in new formats and have the most like creative freedom possible? And I think where I'm at now at the Verge and just kind of like my career trajectory and where it is now, I feel like I have the most of that I've ever had, which is like a real blessing to have. So we kind of describe, Nilay Patel, my boss or editor, and she kind of describes this as a high functioning Montessori. So everyone is kind of just doing their thing on a big platform, and it's been pretty cool.
And how's like the process? And I guess like I just look at the reporting process, and then just like given that you guys are predominantly ad supported, like has the business changed a bunch over the years? Just given like there's not. I'm trying to think of even like of the media companies. I don't know who I feel like is like accelerated to the point that like the Verge has over the last few years. Like everyone's sort of like degraded to some extent. Like what is that?
Yeah, we're trying to. Thank you. We're trying to be the last good website. That's like the thing we say internally a lot. It is tough. I think I kind of came up when I got into like big city media, like leaving the blogging era, which, I say that lovingly. Like I think Verge is doing blogging at a big scale, but I would say when I came up that we were in the Facebook pivot to video traffic era, where all the media publishers were just looking for checks from platforms to spin up, teams or Facebook, Snapchat Discover, which I was a part of a couple times, reported a lot on, Twitter video under Anthony Noto. The platforms were all just like, give us your journalism, we'll pay you, and we'll figure out the long-term economics later. Oh, and like, by the way, we'll twist the dials later and screw you, which is what ended up happening. And the biggest thing I've noticed with just how the business has changed in the last few years is publishers realizing that the platforms are not going to be there to save them. There is no stability there. A ticking time bomb kind of underneath all of this is Google search traffic and how AI is starting to disintermediate that. And how does that affect publishers who, still get a ton of traffic, us included, from Google. And Facebook really isn't in the picture anymore as like a referral source, but Google certainly. And publishers realizing that we need to diversify where our audience comes from and also build a direct relationship with them. And so that's really been the kind of, I think, defining narrative of media for the last few years, is honing in on that direct relationship. It's what I'm trying to do with my newsletter. It's what we're going to start doing as a site with more paid products. We just ran a big audience survey on this, and we have aspirations to do some interesting things with paid and subscription that are beyond, what I'm doing. I was kind of one of our first little test projects is kind of how I thought of it when we started it about a year ago. And so, yeah, that's kind of where everything's going is some kind of paid, some kind of logged in, know who your audience is, experience. And, as a journalist, it's like super rewarding because you get to have, you don't feel kind of distanced from the audience because you're on like a big website that is kind of impersonal and like, it's drive-by traffic. You actually get to know who's reading you, and they respond to your emails and they reach out to you, and it's cool. So it's been a very interesting change to observe.
And we had Jessica Yellen, the former chief White House correspondent for CNN, on here talking about why she moved from traditional media to kind of a direct relationship. There does seem to be this trend that you're talking about where reporters are either going fully independent and starting a Substack or starting a newsletter or starting something on Instagram and trying to get direct dollars. But what you've done with Command Line is still under the Verge banner. And it sounds like there's going to be more and more of these paid products, but still direct relationships between reporters and their readers. What do you think the benefit is for you guys, obviously still being under the banner of the Verge, a larger media company, instead of maybe you going independently as Alex Heath, writing Command Line, as Alex Heath?
Yeah, I certainly thought about that. And there's interesting, companies, startups out there. I would say Puck is one. It kind of exploring the in-between space of this model, which is going fully independent versus, being at a brand. And I don't know, I like working with people. I also like being able to take a vacation and not worry about like the lights turning off, like at work, right? And strike breaking or something like that. And I like having a video team I can lean on, a creative team, which our creative team, I would stand up against really any in terms of what we do with layout and art and the way we do video, and our audio production team. And just being at a large company, we're owned by Vox Media, which has, dozen plus brands. And I've been able to be on the cover of New York Magazine with a story that also ran on The Verge. I've done narrative, kind of long form audio based on reporting that I did on The Verge for like one of our shows, Land of the Giants. And it's just a lot harder to get all that going by yourself. I have many friends who went independent. Casey Newton is a good friend of mine, is kind of the reason I'm at The Verge today. And have watched his journey going independent with Platformer. And if you can do that and you can scale it like he has, I think it's great. And I think more people should be doing that. But I think people thought that when Substack came out that there was going to be this mass exodus of talent from traditional media all going independent. And I think it just turns out that it's a lot harder to make a living doing that than people think. And not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, just because you're a talented reporter doesn't mean you have any kind of business acumen or even care necessarily about the business model that's supporting your work, which is, I think kind of a bad thing. I think that's a thing that needs to change, and something I'm a huge kind of proponent of is having journalists understand the business that they're in. I don't think that church and state divide should be as strong as it once was, just because of how rapidly changing the industry is. But I would say, yeah, it's just kind of realizing that I get more value out of being at a place like The Verge, where I can also kind of have my cake and eat it too now, where I do have my own little kind of mini outlet or, media brand, so to speak, within The Verge. And we're doing this with the podcast industry newsletter that's paid called Hot Pod. That's a similar model. We're going to do more of these. We're very interested in not paywalling, but charging for software, not just editorial. So how can we have a very loyal audience that's been kind of there since the beginning, over 10 years with the site. And there's a lot of things they would like and they would pay for if we enabled it. And like, how can we do that? How can we make a bundle? There's power in numbers and scale. and being able to have the massive free products and paid products that feed out of that has been a really nice flywheel, because the companies that we cover want to be on the homepage. They want that big audience, and they also, want to go deeper with us and like command line and other things we do. So, it's changing, man. It's like this, everyone is trying to figure it out, but yeah, I would say so far, going independent hasn't been something to me that, makes sense. Not that it ever will, but
And for you, like, I mean, I'm trying to think of who else I read that secures like the interviews that you do, like, just giving like
Mhm.
Zuck interviews and just sort of, and also just breaking all this news. Do you attribute that to, is it a mix of like, listen, the Verge is huge, like you've got
Mhm.
to get reach, like this is just worthwhile for you. Is that like a big part of it? Or is it like, listen, like I understand this shit. I'm not going to like butcher it. Like I understand tech. Like I can actually have a conversation with you. What do you kind of attribute all that? Is it like a secret sauce to how you get these people who seem to trust almost no one, to trust you? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I try to walk this balance between access and reporting. That's very difficult. And it's something that I see a lot of my peers struggle with, where it's a lot easier. It's still not easy, but it's easier to over rotate to one or the other, where you're all access based, which is like always going in through the front door, leads to soft interviews, leads to, um, just not being critical of the companies you're covering. And then there's the other side, which is equally difficult to maintain, which is like scoops, kind of how we all came to know each other early in the day at Snap, when I was like breaking news on Snap all the time, kind of, doing things that the company doesn't necessarily want out there, right? But that people find valuable. And I tend to go back and forth and try to find a middle ground. And like, I don't know, I don't want to toot my horn here, but I try to be fair, which is like, no surprises, no like pot shots. And I find that doing that means that when I am critical, it has more weight because I reserve those punches a little more. And I find that, most of these CEOs, are kind of like game recognized game. Like they actually, as long as you're like not, they're in very contentious business meetings all the time. Like they have to deal with a lot more backstabbing, than we even like know from the outside. And like reporting is not backstabbing, but it's like, they know that like if you're doing your job and you're doing it well and you're being fair about it, like they respect that, has been my experience. And certainly not everyone is that way. um, but I would say the best kind of leaders of companies are, because they are measured in their takes there. So yeah, I would say it's just like consistency and, fairness and thinking long term with relationships, which is something that is like kind of a universal thing. But like I you know I try to play the long game with relationships, and I'm not as transactional as I could be. And I think that pays dividends over time, where someone, you met years ago ends up helping you nail something, random, just like out of the blue later. Or I can help someone, so I don't know. It's like, I am genuinely interested in the space as well. And like, I love tech. And like I was saying at the beginning, I fell into this just because I'm a nerd. And I think that is also a different thing, for a lot of people that are getting interviewed to experience, is like someone who's just genuinely interested in the technology. The Verge is like inherently an optimistic publication about technology, which is, increasingly rare and something that these companies appreciate. uh, we are also critical, but we are not like, our defining worldview is not that, and my defining worldview is not that like tech is inherently bad, or that these companies are inherently, monopolistic, soul sucking, cyborgs. Like there's people behind them that are trying to do the right thing. Not always. When they don't, we will call it out. They expect us to, but, we are interested in the tech. We're interested in the specs as much as we are in like the business strategy. So I think that also separates us kind of increasingly with a lot of the coverage you see these days. And we're not perfect, but like we do try to have a little bit more of like a we just love this stuff kind of view of it that I think is unique.
Yeah. I mean, that's awesome. I mean, that's why we're doing this podcast. That's why we've been doing tech for as long as we have too. I mean, we're inherently optimistic as well. But you've been doing this for so long, and you're talking to these leaders that Mark Zuckerberg 10 years ago is not the Mark Zuckerberg of today. And so you've almost grown up with these guys, and they've grown up with you, and the businesses have evolved. And so one, like how is that, knowing these leaders for 10, 15 years and seeing the evolution of them as individuals, but then also how, the divergence of maybe companies that have been run really well and the cultures that have been cultivated versus companies that, somehow maybe took a wrong turn and it didn't go the path that we all thought.
Yeah. I mean, tech has become the new Wall Street, I feel like, especially in the last like 5 years, whereas before it still felt kind of a little counterculture, a little outsider. Now it's like you go to these conferences and, they have more security than like anyone, and they're more untouchable and hard to get to. And the money is just, concentrated to such a wild degree, the net worths of these people. Yeah, I think observing, like, you can see it in like the business performance, right? It's very hard to run large scale companies successfully for a long period of time. And there's only a handful of companies that are doing that. I don't know what the acronym these days is. I saw something on CNBC about how it's like manga now or something like that. Like what are we calling the?
Yeah, Microsoft like got in, like
yeah. I don't know the actual
I know
acronym.
Snap hasn't snuck itself in.
No, Snap's not in there yet. Yeah, I mean,
I think it's Magna. It's like it's almost like MAGA-esque. Like there's some allusion to MAGA. I think.
Yeah, no, you realize over time, like who has that kind of unique generational like ability to operate at such a high level. And, Zuckerberg's definitely up there. I think Tim Cook's done a fantastic job with Apple in terms of the business. I think there's like some bigger long-term problems he set up at Apple, but that are more cultural, but, Nadella, but it's like, I don't know, what I really interested in is like the founder, more products led CEOs. And there's increasingly few of those in big tech. I guess Zuckerberg's technically the last one. There's a lot of like manager type CEOs in place now that are doing things for shareholders and not thinking super long term. Evan at Snap is kind of, he has the chance to still, I think, build something that is really enduring. I think it's TBD on the business side of how that gets there. But yeah, it's, I have an interest in the early stage all the way up to like mega big tech. So, I'll write about someone raising a $3 million seed round, because of I know them, their pedigree, whatever, what they're doing, the problem. And I'll also, do the Zuckerberg interviews. So I try to because you find that it's fun to watch these people, change jobs, progress in their careers, eventually become, VPs at so-and-so. And I've gotten to see that. And the person that was like low level at one point that was like begging to talk to you is like untouchable, 5 years later. Like I've seen that happen. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have any like specific, standout things that I've observed. I would just say that it's just the money and the power has just become so immense. Like I do know Davos is happening the week that we're doing this. And like the Sam Altman talk is like the hottest talk to get into, obviously, with like a line down the street. And I don't know if 10 years ago Davos, who that would be, if that would have been like a Jamie Dimon type or something. It's definitely, tech is kind of eating the world now.
Is like spending time with these guys? Like, are you is Zuck and Altman, are these guys just are they on a different level? Like, does it feel like you're like, man, these dudes are smart, or is it like a mixture, a bunch of things, or you can't say because you're a journalist and you have to be neutral, but can you tell there's a gear? Can you just tell there's a different gear to these guys? Like I think me and Daniel are impressive. We're not saying there's something different.
there's something about like uh thinking really long term and really big picture that you can kind of observe in some of these people. Definitely in Zuckerberg, like, and I think it can be for better or worse. Like, I think sometimes like they could have a little more like grounding, would probably be a good thing. I think Altman is like also very high level kind of big picture thinker. Um, Evan, I think is, that as well. And yeah, I, I mean, these are like normal people that have fallen into like, like extravagant, extreme circumstances, right? So like they're human beings, they get jealous, they get, embarrassed, they get pissed like the rest of us. And I've been kind of on the receiving end of all those emotions from some of these people. And they can be petty. But like, it's been really rewarding to learn from people like this and like how they think and like also just to be able to like ask them questions that I know other people want to ask, that I'm just fortunate enough to be in the position to ask. And, like this interview I just did with Zuckerberg about, AI and kind of focusing the company on AGI, like pretty cool to just get to like pick his brain on that. And uh, I hope that, I'm seen as, like I'm not going to be a softball. Like I'm not going to just let you like take over the interview, but at the same time, like a conversation is to have a conversation. It's to like hear the other side. And I think a lot of like interviewers can be a little more hostile or a little more transactional. So I don't know. It's like podcasts like this. I think that's why people gravitate towards, podcasts among friends like this is, it's conversation and it's more just learning from each other. And I think podcasts are a very interesting leading indicator of like the kind of media people want to consume, which is kind of just more conversation. So yeah.
And I do want to get into the AI piece of it and kind of your thoughts there in just a sec. But
Mm-hmm.
AI does seem to represent this like transformative shift happening in tech over the last 2 years or
Mm-hmm.
so. And I think we have started to see a culmination of companies having to reorganize and reorient themselves for this kind of new era. And you've reported recently, but also over the last several years of major layoffs at a lot of these tech companies, um,
Mm-hmm.
oriented around kind of reorganization and trying to solidify themselves for the future. So, like, you do a lot of reporting of news and analysis. Layoffs seem like a very different type of reporting. So, one, kind of what is that like? But then,
Yeah.
two, like, is that the
Yeah.
right point of view that these companies are really trying to set themselves up, or is it truly we need to cut costs and the easiest way to do that is to cut the count?
I think it's nuanced. It depends on, I mean, I'm reporting on these layoffs because it's what people in the industry are talking about. And especially since I've done the newsletter, I'm trying to be, and especially since I've done the newsletter, I've been trying to be a little more on the ball of like the vibe right now in tech. And right now it's just everyone's worried about layoffs and they're happening everywhere. YouTube just laid off a bunch of kind of business support people, and reading between the lines there, it's like AI is coming for those jobs, right? So there is an element, I think the same thing with like Google's layoffs in the ad sales division. It's like a lot of these jobs will be subsumed by AI over time, and the leaders know that. Um, a lot of the cuts are also just everybody overhired in the pandemic. Everyone drank the Kool-Aid and thought that these, pandemic, once in a lifetime, situation, growth metrics were going to sustain for some reason. And that or the world wasn't just going to go back to normal, and they way overhired. And it happened at big tech all the way down to like mid cap, like smaller cap, like Discord, which just laid off 17%. And, we're in that resetting period still for that, and it's going to continue throughout this year. And in the bigger companies, the Googles, the Metas, the Microsofts, they're, I think, just going, how close to the bone can we cut and be efficient? So it's, it's been it's been like a wake up moment of, for a while, Google, I like to cover, this stuff at Google because Google was kind of the poster child of this, of like coddling, never doing layoffs, always up and to the right, becoming the most like, luxurious place to work. And now they're just doing these rolling layoffs without warning, siloed team by team, and they've been doing them for weeks. They'll continue to do them. And it's because they've realized like, oh, like we can just keep cutting. And the shareholders like it. It's good for efficiency. It's good to remove layers of management. This was Zuckerberg's thing last year, was like, we have too many managers not doing anything, which is true. If you talk to people there. And kind of similar at Snap, way overhired. And so people saw what Elon did at Twitter, at X, and then they also were coming out of the pandemic with growth rates, plummeting, realizing like we have to make cuts. And then there's the AI piece. So I would say it's a mix of all that together.
It's interesting. I probably shouldn't say this, but like I've talked to a bunch of friends that are like on more engineering and product oriented teams at those companies. And I can speak from my experience even at Snap. It's like, I think there's a bunch of people who wanted to build really like wanted to do good work and like build rational companies that for like years were like, what the hell is leadership doing here? And like now that like leadership sort of aligned with like it's like they finally like gotten alignment with like their best employees in a weird way, where it's like this is a good thing. Like it was at Snap when we were there, it was not motivating to like have a bunch of people, that like were sitting around doing like, well, you didn't know what they were doing, So like, I have been kind of like, even though it's obviously really like, it's such a bummer for people who've been let go. It's like, even like, to your point about like kind of the Verge being optimistic and like the Andreessen techno optimism stuff. It's like, there is a little part of that, which is like, you can see a year from now, these companies are going to be crushing it. Like, I really do think it's just sad.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to speed things up. I think the most fair criticism here is, who takes responsibility for the overhiring, and where do consequences fit into this for anyone beyond those who are just, victims of the overhiring and are now getting laid off in a much worse, tech hiring environment. We so far haven't seen any of these CEOs, take massive pay cuts, be fired, really bear responsibility in a public way. I think Zuckerberg actually, did when they did the initial cuts at Meta, but obviously like nothing's changing there. Right. So I think like the biggest piece of feedback I get that I think is fair from people who are getting laid off, like Google, for example, laid off a bunch of people recently that have been there for 20 years. And it's like, where are the consequences beyond me getting laid off? Like, who's taking responsibility for the decisions that led to this? And I don't think we've seen that. And so until it's like really, really demanded from the rank and file, I don't think we will, but I think that's a fair criticism. But yeah, otherwise I would totally agree with you that a lot of these companies are just too bloated. There were stories I kept hearing during the pandemic of like people at like Google having multiple jobs, full-time jobs, like their boss not knowing, because of how little they had to work. So yeah, I mean, these companies got way too bloated because we were in that, ZERP, cash is free, growth into the right era for so long. And now we're in a much different era.
Does this like for maybe not for you, cause you're a little more established, but for like an up and coming reporter or someone kind of lower on the desk, is this like an opportunity they want to go seek out people that have been laid off to try to figure out, what's been going on? There's 20,000 people that got laid off. One of them is bound to want to share something, or like a disgruntled girlfriend. But like, is that, yeah. What's the point of view from someone like you?
Yeah. It's a lot easier to find people who have just been fired who want to, talk shit. I mean, I do that too. You want to have a rounded perspective. So the most interesting thing and the harder thing to get is like, what is the actual real rationale for the cuts? Because increasingly it's not being communicated, especially at like Google recently. And where is the pressure on whoever made the call up at the VP or above layer to do this. Is it coming from the board? Is it coming from shareholders? Coming from the founders? And that's what I'm really interested in, is kind of like where it all started. But yeah, you learn a lot from like talking to these people. You learn about like the areas of the company that that leadership has realized either are cost centers or that don't make sense anymore, or not as strategic as they once were. Some of the layoffs you're seeing Amazon do, and it's like media division. I mean, Twitch has been completely gutted. It's like a, kind of skeleton of itself. And, when money is no longer free, you start to realize like what's actually critical. And so I think we're seeing that for sure.
And like covering someone like Google, like, and obviously covering OpenAI and it's having kind of these sources in general. What is your take on like, are they going to be, this is maybe like, I think of like Facebook, for example, where like when I hear Zuck and I hear his interviews to do with him, like I think Zuck's going to pull it off. Like I believe when Zuck, like when they like move that ship to where they're going to go from like going to be, VR company to being AI, like they will pull it off. I've just seen them. I saw them when we were partners with them, my first company, and then I saw them pull it off to slow down Snapchat. Like they are very effective at going to where they want to go. I haven't seen Google have to react like this, like at least in my career. Like based on what you're seeing, like what do you think happens there between like, them kind of evolving, and I guess maybe in the context of OpenAI in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what I just talked to him about. I think Zuckerberg sees an opportunity to be the kind of open source alternative, and I think has a view of like where the value is going to accrue that is maybe a little different or a little more like focused than some others, which is like these foundational large language models that power all this stuff are becoming kind of increasingly commodified and standardized and cheaper to access, et cetera, and similar. And so the value will probably accrue to the biggest platforms that have the most user activity, engagement, surfaces to make money off these experiences. He's got, probably just next to Google, the biggest. And so it makes sense to be, and, they've done a lot of kind of foundational work with their research org that was set up. It's kind of, he wanted to buy DeepMind, and it was in kind of a bidding war with Google way back in the day. So he's been thinking about this for a long time. And yeah, I do think they weren't really in the conversation kind of when ChatGPT was like first hitting big, but I think increasingly, especially in like the developer community, they are, just because of like Llama, and, wanting to build AGI with those kinds of resources is you got to pay attention to that. And it's like now everyone's holy grail has moved from like AR glasses that, supplant phones to AGI that then kind of powers AR glasses and everything else. And is kind of like the foundational platform. So I don't know when that happens, but that's definitely like, you can't, walk, you can't walk far in Silicon Valley and not hear people talking about that. So I am very interested to see kind of like, is all this talk about AGI more of a smoke screen, or is it actually coming soon? And yeah, I think Meta is just a key player there. I like, why do you guys, what's your all's kind of thesis on Meta and AI? I'm curious.
I think similar, to be honest. I think they're basically going to win. I mean, I look at, if you can just sort of think of their AI as being the new, like, open graph. Like everyone built all these apps on top of like the Facebook graph in like this past period. And they were like the identity layer, and it definitely connected like the social web. I think in a really logical new way that like change every experience. I think it's fairly analogous for them to say, okay, like, sure, we can bring the context of your friends, but now we're going to bring the context of this like intelligence in every experience. It's just like they're adding, there's a perfect person to add another person to the conversation, which is effectively AI. So, and we've played around with a bunch of, for our own company, we played around with with the open source ones versus, OpenAI, and like the difference for most experiences is nominal. And like you look at what they're doing with Meta AI, like in Instagram in particular, and you hear the things he said. He said it to you, and he said it to, I think he said it on Rogan too. It's like, it's so like he's telegraphing it. A year from now, you're gonna be like, "Hey, Meta, make me an ad." Obviously, we think of it as the context of ads, but it's like make me an ad, make it there's a dog, and make sure I make at least $1.05 off it. It's like no one should doubt the guy. Like that's the easiest thing. The hard part's gonna be like, and which I think is gonna be awesome, is like, and I think it's where he gets beat up. I'd love to report this, but like the Oculus stuff, I just don't think he was right. It's just gonna be a lot of those worlds are probably gonna be created by AI. Like it's just gonna make those things more like real, and maybe it happened
Yeah.
faster than he thought. But yeah, I've seen that guy just pull off too many times to doubt him. Yeah.
Yeah. The VR AR stuff is still constrained by the hardware. And you see that even with like Apple's Vision Pro this year, which I've gotten to try, and it's amazing, but it's like, it still weighs a lot. It's still something you're not going to wear around, like walking around. It has 2-hour battery life. Like that's coming from Apple at like a super high end price point. Like this hardware is not going to be ready for everyday, all day, commercially viable use for still many years. And so as like you're waiting for tech to catch up and kind of key like science breakthroughs to happen, AI is like this accelerant that's going on, where you see it with like their Ray-Ban glasses, where they're doing multimodal, AI in those, where you can just like look at something and have it explain it back to you. And like, oh, that kind of like, I think everyone's realizing that these LLMs make a lot of sense in like a wearable context. And I do see that dovetailing with their kind of investments in AR and VR. I don't know if it's the next computing platform, so to speak. I think phones will be around for a very long time, but I do think when we have glasses that have, these ChatGPT level smart assistants in them, and maybe like small displays, which is coming sooner than we think. Like the Ray-Bans will have displays in them next year in 2025. But when that starts happening, things will get really interesting. You'll see new companies being built, I think about like Uber and like the early iPhone, and just how like new companies can be built off of these like fundamental shifts in how we use technology. And it just feels like we're at the beginning of that and like, I don't know, I know you guys were there too, like just coming from CES, like seeing all the excitement about the Rabbit R1 and all this wearable AI stuff. People are putting ChatGPT in cars. Like everyone's just trying to like figure out how can we supercharge the devices we use with this. And I think we're going to be in for one of the most exciting like couple of years for just consumer hardware that we've seen in a long time too. And Meta's perfectly positioned for that. Like,
Do you think Snap? Obviously, we're biased just seeing it, but like, there's like two things I think about like for Snap. Like, do you think Snap has a place in it? And like one thing that like kind of worries me about, like Evan's been right about all these big shifts. Like he's always right, I feel like, in like the broad strokes, but then it's like to be spectacles, but like or even a bunch of stuff in the app now. It's like they're becoming like an OpenAI app, right? It's like so tied to OpenAI that it's like kind of the antithesis of what you're describing with Meta, which is like, like it's, you want to be the platform, not the application.
Right.
And like, do you think Snap has a hand to play there, or does it feel like it's not there?
I've talked to Evan about this many times over the years. I don't understand the investment in hardware. I never have. I mean, I get it. If the goal is to create, an AR wearable software platform that you are then like licensing or partnering on with others. But Evan's aspiration still seems to be to do the full stack and to be the hardware and the software. And you just can't compete with the amount of money and R&D that's going into, like Meta spends like DARPA level money on its AR glasses. Like you just can't compete with the economies of scale on hardware here. And Apple obviously has the supply chain locked up, does it better than anyone, is now in the space, is serious about it. So I don't really know where, and I've written about this in the newsletter in the last several months. Like, I don't really know where Snap fits in strategically long-term. If you do believe the shift is coming, Google has gotten out of AR hardware. they want a license. So basically, if you realize you don't have a path to like selling millions of devices yourself, you link up with someone. Well, Google also wants to link up with someone. Do you link up with Google? I don't know. I think Snap as a acquisition makes a lot of sense. I don't see the path to being a meaningful player in that, just given the constraints on the business today, that they have to pay back, not being profitable still, the ads business still struggling. There's just a lot of things to figure out. I mean, we could have probably spent this whole hour on Snap, and we should probably talk about it now, but like, I think the core problem, as you guys know, for Snap is still that they don't monetize the core experience, right? Is that chat remains free, no ads, and you don't want to put ads in there. And so when you're not monetizing the thing that people are, spending the most time in the app doing, it's really tough. Yeah. Evan has also just cycled through a lot of leadership on the business side, right? It hasn't been a stable org there for, really ever. On the business
like you said,
side.
we could talk about that for an hour, probably not recorded and with you off record, but
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I
believe though, but I don't know where they fit. To your point, it's just like what happens to it, It just like
right. Do they have meaningful enough scale?
Tough.
It's a scale game, and as you guys know better than I, the way the ad tech world is going, it's all kind of accruing to the scale of walled gardens, all the power increasingly, and so with gravity, doing that, it's like it's really tough. And they still have that super sticky young user base, which is like obviously incredibly valuable and growing. But I don't know. I would like to see some like, it's like when I was really covering Snap, like all the time, there was always like a surprise around the corner. I feel like Evan was always pulling out like the redesign or a new Tabity app or something like that for a period of time. And after going public, it feels like the product has kind of grown a little stagnant. They're doing the AI stuff, but it's a little bit of like follow-on type product stuff. It's not kind of pushing the boundary in how it used to be. And so I'd like to see a little more of that. I think social media needs that. And so, Facebook needs, more ideas, right? So,
and it's funny, like quickly on the Snap side, like there's three things I was thinking about with them. It's like, one is until they can age up, like you think of like of an ad context, you can only extract as much value. Like you think of like Snap as a country, it's got like a fixed GDP. And because the people are young, the GDP is low.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you can only extract as much as like your economy. And so that's like a fundamental problem. And to your point, it's like to age up, you need to innovate. And then, I think there's other things like we've seen this and we've talked to friends at some of these other platforms. There's like this AI tax that's coming where it's like Facebook and Google, particularly on the ad side, like Facebook, Google, and Amazon, like A, you kind of need to buy them. And then B, their AI is awesome and it's easier to buy. And so it's like, not only are things like you need it more and it's easier and they have the AI that controls it all. It's just like, it sets up, if you're like a tier 2 player, you got like a bunch of stuff going against you. And you've like become, like, and that's where the Snap like worries me. Cause like, are they becoming an app in the OpenAI app store, and like, that sucks, like if that's the case, if that's what they're so reliant on. So yeah, I mean, I hope that's not the case, but, I'll keep reading your reporting. You'll tell us. Yeah.
Look, Evan has proved people wrong for a long time. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, but yeah, I think they're in the like show me phase now, right? Where it was like, tell me for a while. And now it's like, I think investors and everyone is like, you got to show me now the results. And I think Evan knows that, feels that pressure. But yeah, I mean, what do you guys think is going to happen with OpenAI this year? Cause like I was covering the boardroom drama pretty in depth and like, talked to Altman right after he came back, and it was a very weird interview because like, I just wanted to ask him like, why were you fired? And he couldn't answer. And that was the whole interview. Like I'm asking that question over and over, but, I think there's going to be more to come out. They're doing that investigation. They're still trying to fill the board. He's not on the board anymore, which still controls the company. I think things are a lot more tense there than they're letting on, and everyone's obviously watching to see like, do they implode? Do they not? And yeah, I'm kind of curious. Like, obviously, like they are talked about constantly still, but what do you guys think? What do you think will happen this year with them?
I think for me, I think it represents a kind of a chink in the armor that like Google can now try to go
Yeah.
very aggressively with Bard and some of the other things they're working on, and obviously integrating that within everything they have.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've talked at length about Facebook or Meta that they're going to go very aggressively. And so I think there is now an opportunity where other players are going to start to take away mind share, take away market share, and they have products that they can integrate with. Right? They don't need to build the developer ecosystems. Meta has their full ad stack, has their billions of users that they can get direct access to. Google, the same thing. And so I think, OpenAI, I mean, we obviously still use it and it's still very good, but as James said, like the difference between them is negligible now, at least from like a consumer standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think they have to become a platform, right?
It's just tough
I
because
mean,
it reminds me of Snap in a weird way, where it was like Snap showed the way with like vertical video and stories. And I think OpenAI showed the way with ChatGPT. But then you have like a CAC problem. Like it's, like I don't know if you played around with the ChatGPT app store, but like when Apple gets their act together with Siri, like that's gonna be an awesome LLM. Like that thing will be incredible, and you can integrate it on the OS, device level. And so, like, I don't know, maybe I'm like was scarred by being at Snap when Instagram was just like ripping off everything and doing it so well. Is that I don't know if you got Meta, if you have a motivated Meta, as you've definitely documented, and you have a Google who has like is fighting for like an existential kind of existence, and Google's also like, we talked about this before, Dan and I, about like, Meta used to make money off of like discovery, right? It would be like see a random Instagram ad, right?
Mm-hmm.
They never had search, they never had intent, and that's like the holy grail to ads. Meta AI is intent. I mean, you're asking it for stuff, and so it's like, a motivated Google, a motivated Meta, and then an Apple who is like oddly quiet makes me think if you're trying to acquire developers and be a platform, it's going to be very expensive. It's just hard to pull off.
But you need your own distribution, right? I mean, that's been Zuckerberg's kind of like inherent struggle from the beginning, like with mobile, is that he became like a serf on Apple's, property, and has been trying to break out of that ever since. And like, it's like, I think OpenAI is quickly realizing like, oh shit, we need our own distribution, whether that's like consumer hardware, raising money for that, or a store. We need people coming to us directly somehow, and we don't own a phone, we don't own a store. Well, they do now, but like it's a store on other people's stores, subsumed by other people's stores, right? So like I think that's their big struggle. It's like distribution.
And I think the relationship with Microsoft also makes it hard. They can't now be friends with any of these other big companies because they're so close with Microsoft. And so they're not a Microsoft company, but they're effectively one in the eyes of everyone else in the space.
And Microsoft is selling it, on its own P&L with its own sales team for its own products, while OpenAI is trying to have its own enterprise business. Like that's, to me, I mean, you guys both worked in like sales and advertising. Like, I don't see how that's tenable long term. Cause like you've got two teams trying to sell it in different ways. I just don't see how that works.
I forget I'm sure you know the name, but the guy who runs AI at Facebook, Meta, he's like the open source proponent, but he always tweets about
Jan.
Jan
Within.
But I follow him like pretty closely. Like, I feel like you read his tweets and you're like, if OpenAI's play is like to build the best AI, like if that is the play, that's a hard game to play. Like that alone seems tough. But
well, I like your Snap analogy, because it's like you can build the best social media, right? That like is how people actually want to use this stuff. But like scale and distribution and R&D and budget is ultimately what matters, right? Like ideas can be copied, and you need to have like defensible moats, whether it's distribution or what have you. It's usually distribution. And so I do think that's what's driving like OpenAI and all these people to like look at hardware is like, I just am kind of like bearish on Humane and the Tab and like Rewind Pendant and all of these, like, I think they're really cool, interesting ideas. And I'm glad people are thinking creatively about this stuff for the first time in a while. But like, once Siri just like actually works on our phones, like it's going to render a lot of these startups just obsolete, right? Which we may be like 6 months away from. So it's like Siri can't even like answer can't give a coherent like explanation. So like, why are we trying to invent whole new like wearable paradigms? Right?
Well, Alex, we know you've got a lot going on. This has been fun, kind of breaking down what's coming in your career, but we really appreciate you coming on, and we'll have to have you back.
Yeah, it's flown by. I feel like we could have done this for a while. Thanks, guys. It's fun.
Totally, man. I appreciate it. You're the best. Please keep doing
guys.
all the reporting you're doing. We really do appreciate it. And just for everyone, go to the Verge and follow him everywhere.
Yeah.
And subscribe to the newsletter.
Thank you.
And do all those
Appreciate that, guys. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, man. Take care.
Thanks, Alex.